I've stopped trying to work out where the root of the problem was, because I'm not sure it gets us anywhere. And I think it's maybe born of the same problem, the same thinking, meaning that if we understand the cause of a problem, we can go and fix it, and then it'll all be okay again. And that's still a kind of mechanistic view, isn't it? That's still, oh, we'll just replace that part, or realign the drone in a different way. And, you know, I mean, there's lots of good contenders for where we've gone wrong. Was it the Neolithic Revolution? Was it the Industrial Revolution? Was it Christianity? You know, is it the digital revolution? What is it? Where is it? Where are we going wrong? But there does seem to be something about a way of looking at the world. I think you said it really nicely about the drone, that what is it about a drone that's offensive? Because I know some people who take phenomenal photographs with drones. They're a tool. But what was it about that moment that meant the drone, the noise of it, the way it was moving, jarred with the experience you were having or looking for? And there's something about lines. It's something about straight lines. And I remember seeing a talk years ago, I can't remember who was giving it, but they were saying that with the invention of the railways, it was the first time that the paths we made across the landscape, they no longer followed the landscape. It was just laid out on a map, and we're gonna, oh, there's a hill in the way, we'll cut the hill out the way, or we'll dig a tunnel, or we'll build an viaduct. And that I almost attribute that to the Romans, because they had that same kind of, we're going to go in a straight line. We're not going to wend. There's no wending anymore. There's no following the landscape. And somewhere you were following the landscape. Okay, you were in a car, you were in technology, but there was something about the intention with which you'd gone to the hill was very different to this linear buzzing machine. And our culture is all about straight lines, whether that's on a motorway or whether it's the ruthless lines of efficiency in consumer capitalism, which means, of course, it's cheaper to have automated tills in the supermarket rather than have people, you know, this endless rationalization. And we don't have time for wending, for taking the slow route, for winding our way up the hill.
Yeah, great stuff. It makes me think of that phrase, the devil walks in straight lines.
Ah, I don't know that, but yeah, it's a good, yeah.
And also, I heard something, maybe we could sort of touch on Faery and fairies, because Faery is sort of place, isn't it, a realm, an imaginal realm, and what is imagination. And is also a kind of an otherworldly creature, as well as being a place. But I heard, in folklore, that they're allergic to iron.
Yes.
And that maybe, I was thinking, okay, and they can't cross railways. And I was like, oh, is that because of the iron thing? And why iron? What is it about the quality of the metal? You know, you have a science background, but you have arts background, music, philosophy. So this is partly why I wanted to talk to you, because you can think with a bit of curvature.
Well, let's try.
Yeah. And so, as someone who has a background in ecological science, but these other influences as well that are deeply aesthetic and soulful, maybe you could touch on just someone who thinks fairies are just those kind of butterfly-winged, pretty creatures.
Well, yes, I mean that the butterfly fairies, the flower fairies, that's a sort of Victorian, Edwardian conceit, isn't it? But you know, in the stories, they're far more. I was going to say vicious, but I don't. That's not the right word. They've just got their own agenda in the stories, haven't they? And they, you know, if you get rid of an ant's nest, say in your garden, because the ants are coming into your house, that's your own agenda. You don't want ants in your house, so you put down ant killer and kill an ant's nest. To the ants, you must be this horrible demonic force that's set out to destroy ant kind. Well, fairies, they've just got their own agenda, you know, in the stories. They might very well want to steal your children. It's not that they are uncaring, it's just they want to steal your children. And I don't know, I haven't really considered fairies for a long time, but they're clearly, let's just park for a minute whether they're real or not in some ontological sense. Just the fact that we have this law about them, they're clearly in and of the land, they're in and of place. And, you know, we tend to think of the world as quite benign and caring of us. And of course it isn't. And ecology is brutal, and the land can be brutal, and the weather can turn quickly, and, you know, a sunny day can become, you know, the clouds can come down and you can get lost on the moor. So in that sense, they perhaps, those stories speak to a truth about what the land is. It's not butterfly-winged fairies going ooh and ah, and it's not Tinkerbell, it's not Disney. The land is dark and scary, and it's a place that needs to be negotiated with. You need to move respectfully through the land. I think that's what those stories tell us. And in terms of ecological crisis, we've kind of assumed that we can do whatever we like with the land. To go back to your story, that we can put a drone up if we want, that we have the right to do that. We can just, or we can chop down a tree because it's a nuisance, or, you know, whatever, we want to build a house there. And this older law that we're talking about suggests something else, that the land has its own agency, that it's not always interested in us, and that there needs to be some kind of conversation, some kind of dialogue with it. Sometimes we need to leave offerings of beans and not just go there with our drone and take stuff. And really what I'm talking about here is animism, and this view. Animism is the view that the world is full of people, only some of whom are human, but all of whom are worthy of respect. I'll say that again because it's good. This is from Graham Harvey, one of my great and inspirational teachers. Animism is the view which sees the world as full of people, only some of whom are human, but all of whom are worthy of respect. So it means there are tree people, there are weather people. It doesn't mean we're misattributing aliveness to things. It's just saying we're in a world of radical relationality, and we need to maintain those relationships. And that means we might want to go and leave an offering of beans when we go to a hill that's steeped in fairy lore. We might not just rock up there with our sound system and our drones, and we might want to listen to the needs of the other than human people, rather than constantly putting our own needs first.
Totally, yeah. And my hope for this is this conversation, if anyone sees it, that it's kind of a bridge between people that tend more towards science and maybe the more materialistic end of science, and the people who are interested in soul and spirit, that have a sympathy for science. Because in my experience, you get individuals who embody both beautifully. The best scientists and the best artists often do that. But in my experience, not a lot of people do. I wish more people did. How can we make a bridge between materialistic science and soul or spirit? Soul and spirit are different things. I'm not super clear on the distinction, but it's a really interesting conversation to try and link those things. Your associate Satish Kumar had an indelible conversation with Richard Dawkins, and he was standing for spirit, and Dawkins was standing for materialistic science, and they were both standing very, very strongly for their own way. I felt like Satish was a bit more convivial in that conversation, and was talking about qualities. Things have qualities. A tree has its quantities and it has its qualities, but that spirit and soul And Dawkins said maybe it confuses things because it gets conflated with the supernatural. What you're talking about doesn't seem supernatural, Dawkins said to Satish. It's not that, but maybe you're confusing things. Maybe we shouldn't use the word spirit or spiritual. And obviously Satish was not going for that. He said, no, you're not taking the word spirit from our English language effectively in a more sort of friendly, diplomatic way. And I like that you said that, but it seems like we're kind of missing the third thing, the bridge between them, which some people talk about as soul. That's just one idea, one way to link them. But have you got any sense on, is that an engaging, like a problem for you, or a way of thinking about that? The mind-body split being, I mean, you said before, like being cautious about root causes, but I think history, as you do, is important, and you have quite a deep knowledge of it. And so that mind-body split, that's often, you could see matter and spirit, and soul maybe after the 1500s started to really get eradicated. That's how I like to think about it, but does that spark anything?
Well, I mean, so I see my role as a teacher is always to play the role of devil's advocate.
Lay down. But not in straight lines.
Not in straight lines. So poor old René Descartes gets such a tough time, and I have a huge sympathy for him, because he was writing at a time of huge religious turmoil and Protestants and Christians fighting one another and committing heinous acts, and dreadful time, and that desire for certainty, for something that everyone could agree on. I think that's what motivated him. And of course he had these dreams as well where the angel of truth appeared to him, so one wonders what was going on there. But so I have a sympathy for that desire for scientific knowledge that we can all agree on, rather than theological differences of that tore apart the Christian church. But that said, when I'm amongst scientists, I sort of defend spirit, and when I'm amongst the soulful people, I defend science, because I think we need both. That both are profoundly necessary and interesting. When I was an undergraduate, I did a module in the history and philosophy of science, and retrospectively, I think it's one of the best courses I ever did, and most influential courses, because I suddenly realised the limitations of science, that science is profoundly good at answering certain questions and profoundly bad at answering others. And the problem is that science with a capital S is not just men and women in white lab coats doing experiments and finding stuff out. It's technology, it's peer-reviewed journals, it's science journalism, it's the way science is reported in the press. That whole apparatus of science, within that science with a capital S, there's a kind of assumption that it's got everything sorted. There's just a few kind of minor problems around the edges, but given enough time and enough monkeys, tapping away at the typewriter, eventually we'll solve all the problems. Well, the history and philosophy of science would say otherwise, and it would put very strict limits over what science is able to answer and the kinds of questions it can address. So in my very first ecology lecture, my teacher said, what makes a scientific question? And her view was that the question, does God exist, is not a question science can answer, because it's not something that can be tested experimentally or verified experimentally. So immediately there are questions that science simply cannot answer, but that doesn't stop scientists overreaching themselves and making huge statements about the nature of reality and the human condition, which are completely unjustified. And when I'm in their company, I want to say, read some philosophy. No, get back in your lane. At the same time, I defend science when I'm on the other side. I defend science because we need the critical sword of reason. We need to cut away nonsense. We've never existed at a time when we've needed scientific orthodoxy more, at a time when, post-truth and what have you, we need something that we can agree on. And science is pretty good. When it sticks to its lane and answers scientific questions, is pretty good. So I think we need both, and I think the interesting place is the place where they meet, or the edges. Terence McKenna, the late psychedelic guru, talked about the yin-yang symbol, and how the interesting part of the yin-yang symbol was not that each contains the other side, it's the join. It's the join down the middle, the silvery line that joins soul and mind, or whatever it is, body, mind, however you want to make that dualism. And so I feel like I have a foot in both worlds, science and magic, or that I can't do without either. My life would be immeasurably simpler if I could, but I need both. I need both parts of the equation.
I feel like there's a massive hunger for something numinous, a deeper quality of connection with the life ways of the planet, with the cosmos, and how to get there is really tricky at the moment, because we've killed gods and God, Nietzsche says. Whether that's true or not, that's kind of, the story at the moment is we're adrift in a meaningless cosmos, and we have to come to terms with it and deal with it. But things have quality and personality and agency, and imagination maybe isn't only contained within the human skull. These ideas speak to animism and maybe panpsychism. And so for people searching for a way in or a way out of the hardline materialistic, you're adrift in a meaningless cosmos, everything is just a mechanism, and we've not worked them all out yet, can be quite soul-destroying and disempowering. And how would you offer a little bit of an inroad or invitation or guidance to those people that are searching but they can't find their way out?
Well, I mean, I've had my reluctant atheist phase in my life, and I know how bleak that worldview is. It's not one I subscribe to. So humans are, what we do is we make meaning. That's what we do. We tell stories, we ruminate, we reflect, we philosophize. And even a statement like "we live in a meaningless universe" is a statement of meaning. So it sort of defeats itself. And, like if we live in a meaningless universe, what is the point of doing science? There's no point to it, aside from the utilitarian view that you might be able to, invent a cure for cancer or something like that. But something like astronomy, there is absolutely no point in doing astronomy in a meaningless universe.
Yeah, right. You're saying those astronomers are drawn by something. They're curious and excited by what's out there.
Exactly. Exactly. So scientists who make that statement, I think of someone like Brian Cox, who in his recent Universe, was it Universe? Anyway, his most recent documentary series was constantly taking a pop at religiosity and people who meditate, and saying that meaning is never going to be found within, it can only be found without, and making these preposterous statements like stay in your lane, because it it's still, you're still saying it's meaningful to be a scientist. You know, you could spend your life sitting on a hill smoking dope because that might give you more pleasure, right? And I don't know. I don't really know how to answer that, other than that I feel in myself, and I can't give an intellectual justification for this, but the universe is inherently meaningful. It's not just that we project meaning onto the world, that meaning is to be found out with the human condition, that the world is a fundamentally meaningful place. And yes, we just have, because of the nature of who we are, we can't help but create stories and meaning and metaphor and all of that. But that's because the world is a meaningful place. And then, you know, that's before we start talking about the weird experiences that people start having that are constantly sort of brushed aside by people, the feelings of the numinous, paranormal encounters, religious encounters, all the stuff that gets explained away by science. Oh, well, it's just this or it's just that. Well, that's not what it feels like when you have them. You know, I'm sorry, I'm riffing on your story that you started with, but, you know, you said you were in a numinous state. There was something about the way in which you approached the hills on that morning with the gnarled trees. It was meaningful. It was replete with meaning because there was a feeling that accompanied that. Well, that feeling is not easily explained away. And, you know, I've had those experiences myself all my life, and sometimes I've paid attention to them, sometimes I haven't. But you know, any intellectual justification you give for it, someone can always come up with a counter-argument. But no one can really argue with my experience. And my experience is, my feeling, my felt knowledge, is that the world is meaningful, that meaning resides in the world, that it's not just blank matter moving around like billiard balls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one way to sort of dissolve that subject-object thing is to just remember, and science backs this up, that we're part of the material life of the planet. Even I can say the cosmos, because the planet's in some kind of dynamic process with its solar system and that with whatever else is about that. That's a hell of a talisman for me, to remember that I'm part of all my thoughts are sort of the planet's thoughts. My ideas, my words, they're spoken into this invisible substance that keeps me alive all the time and has been there for a very, very long time, and holds all our music and conversations. That's just the start of something that you guys at Schumacher for a long time now, and probably before that, before you even arrived here, have been practicing. And you know, that's what Stephen Harding has been trying to do with, because you say before, you can't easily explain away that feeling of a hypernuminous encounter with the presence of the land or whatever it is. Well, some people would try to, and they would say it's just a concoction of neuropeptides and chemicals that you've got going on at that time, right? But what are those, and what are they doing, and how many are there? Not even the quantity thing, but the sheer scale and complexity and depth of a single cell within a human body. What's going on in there is just this majestic process that you can get closer to with science and enlivening particles. And this would be an art science approach to coming to know those very small denizens, I want to say, and you know, my poetry here, because I'm a writer, you know, might constellate more something from you, but whatever, go with whatever you want. That seems like a good approach, because that's bringing the science on board. It's bringing like art and poetry and history of ideas, animism into the mix. Do you think that's like worth pursuing further? And if you do, how do you think that could that could happen? Or how would you love to see it happen? Because it can't only be in institutional environments. We need a mixed, dynamic approach, eh?
Well, the nature of the times and the nature of the ecological crisis is such that, time is against us, and we need a really radical transformation of everything. And I'm pessimistic about whether governments are going to do it, such as the sort of invested power of the fossil fuel industries. But on an individual basis, I mean, you've mentioned it, you said there was a hunger for the numinous. We live in a crisis of meaning, where that answer that there is nothing, that we're just billiard balls, bouncing around, it's not answered anything. It can't speak to the human condition, the suffering, the fact that we die, that we fall in love, that our hearts get broken. It just has nothing to offer. So it's quite clear that we need something else. And such is the power of science. I think it's hard for people to just go back to the orthodox religions, the world religions, the traditional religions. So perhaps we're starting to see the emergence of something new, where these two things can meet, maybe. And yes, that is something that's been the story of Schumacher College. Can we have ecology and spirituality? What would happen if we bring those two together? But yeah, the times are such that we need it. It can't just happen at a small college in Devon. But you see, people. For me, it all begins with our relationship with the non-human, and that's something all of us can change, and it's something all of us can cultivate. That all of us can build a relationship, whether you live in rural Devon as I do, or the middle of the metropolis. It doesn't matter. We're surrounded by the non-human. It's just we generally choose not to pay attention to it. But what happens when we pay attention to the, inverted commas, weeds that are growing up through the pavement, or the birds that wake us up in the morning? We learn what bird species they are, and we learn where they nest and what they eat and what they do, and we give them our attention. Immediately that's starting to change our relationship. We notice when they're not there anymore, and then we care about it, we're invested in it. It's a change we can all of us make, and actually it sort of transcends any debates about science and spirituality, because it's just there. We're opening up a space between us and the other and the non-human. What happens when we pay attention to the weather? When we just notice what the weather is, rather than looking at our app or, just carrying a brolly around with us. What happens is it going to rain today? Like, not in I've read on the app. Can I tell whether it's going to rain today? What happens if I change my relationship to the weather? Immediately we start to feel in place, because we know the world in a more intimate way. We know the birds, we know the insects, we know the mammals, we know the seasons, we know the weather. Immediately we start to enrich our relationship with place. And then if you want to bring spirituality into that, and gods and deities and the numinous, fine. But I think here's something that even the most ardent materialist could get on board with, just paying attention, giving our attention to the non-human. I think it's an easy way forward.
How can you hear the voice of the earth from the belly of Moloch? And that Moloch, Allen Ginsberg had a real fucking go at Moloch in that poem. Yeah. Brilliant. And other people have developed that idea. It's in the Soil and Soul by what's he called, the Hebridean, Alistair McIntosh, yes. I think. Yes. Well, it's useful to have these big, like almost mythic. Moloch's a biblical demon, isn't he?
Yes,
that devours the children.
Yes.
But characterising late stage capitalism as this enormously powerful demon that's devouring us
Mm.
and our children. It's quite useful, isn't it? Because we live in a really complex, interconnected world that's, you just can't, we need those images, right?
Yes, we do. And there are a few writers who suggest that it's something innately human to see the world as full of spirits or deities, or to animate it in that particular way, and rather than fighting it and seeing it as something that's primitive and something we should move away from. Actually, yeah, let's imagine capitalism as a demon. How might we slay it? How might we tame it or transform it? Or because that's what humans do. We see the world in that way.
It's like confession then. So I've been told this stuff that you're saying to me. I've been told this all my life pretty much by a couple of oddball parents and a surrounding community. So I'm brought up in Hebden Bridge, a little bit Totnes of the North.
Yeah.
So it's got a little bit of it's got all kinds of problems, drug problems, like, you know, it's working class. I got beaten up by a group of youths, as many people do, walking around. So, you know, it's not like an enclave, but it's a little bit of a spiritual retreat, or felt that way. And you know, being brought up in a place like that, and my dad started a circus when I was born, so the first 4 years of my life was in a sort of contemporary art circus called Snapdragon. And the combination of those two gives you an enchanted early years. And then you assume the whole world is like that. And you learn it isn't. You go, shit, what shall I do? I should write fantasy. Or something like that. But even with all that, I still find it really difficult to do what you're saying. So just go out, you pay attention, you listen, you treat the weather like a kind of intelligence and that you're part of, and you're engaging with it. You're using your different senses. You're not just you're not short-circuiting that old relationship with technologies all the time, and you're just spending time with it. Like, this is kind of like a writing thing with empathy. How do you develop empathy for a character that everyone talks about in books and stuff on how to do writing? And one thing is, it's familiarity and spending time with someone. Like, we met today, and I've seen you a little bit online, but not very much. And at first, maybe it's like, oh, who's this guy and who's that guy? But after an hour and a half or something, a little bit of a rapport. We're not best buddies or anything right now, but do you know what I mean? A little bit. So familiarity is that sort of what you're saying. You spend time.
It's the same. It's the same. You get to know a place. You get to know a species. You develop a rapport. You develop an understanding, and then you see something like climate change. You don't need someone to tell you. I mean, we still need scientists to tell us that it's happening, but you don't actually need it, because you know, I know the weather is weird. The weather's being weird. It shouldn't be this hot in November. I should not be walking around in shorts and t-shirts and bright sunshine in the middle of November, because you know, it's not that you're looking back at records, you just feel it. It's something felt. Like, you know, walking into a room and there's someone a bit off key, and you feel it, don't you? You know that something's not quite right about someone. And
you've got an ecology background, you're trained in science, and you're not saying do away with that. You're saying bring them both and try and integrate them, like the connective tissue between the dark and light sides of the yin, that silver edge. That's where the kind of the juice is for me. But I was going to say before then, even having done things like a wilderness vigil and had this upbringing, I still find it really hard to do that. You know, part of me is like, no, that's not productive. That's not sort of an efficient use of time. I've got children, so I've got, as you do, like hyper compressed free time. So to spend it, how you spend your time. Okay, I'm just going to sit here and listen and do nothing. You know, that's like trying to hear the voice of the earth from the belly of Moloch. It's just this fusion of how deep it penetrates into your thoughts, your psyche, being marinated in a culture of speed, wanting to achieve things and make beautiful things in the world, because beauty has intrinsic value and you're called to it, or because of some childhood trauma, there's some blend of both. There's all kinds of things that Moloch is able to key into, especially with AI-backed social media, how it captures and commodifies our attention. So personally, I feel sometimes taking that 20 minutes or an hour or a night to sleep outside and just listen and pay attention, it's a force of effort. I've got to push through this, like this invisible veil that says, no, that's not an efficient use of time, or you're not achieving things, or you should spend your time doing something else. You should earn money with, these other ideas. Can you relate to that?
Well, I mean, I can, and I don't have an awful lot of time for contemplation, but it's not necessarily something you need to. It's something you can incorporate into your daily life, Through practice. So I had a student once, Dutch student, who worked in the city, and while all his colleagues went out for a cigarette break, he went and sat in the park and just noticed, did that 5 minutes a day.
Instead of a cigarette.
Instead of a cigarette.
That's a good one.
I mean, I have a very nice walk to work. I'm very lucky. But even in the city, if you're walking, you can notice. It's about where you choose to put your attention. Now, it's hard in the city because there's so much of the human world that is constantly pulling your attention, whether it's your phone or the adverts or people, strutting their funky stuff, or the nutter coming towards you, or the chugger, or whatever it is, But if you can just find those moments, you're standing at the train station, what plants are trying to grow up, through the tracks, or what's the weather doing? It's about seizing those moments when you can find them. But I hear you, it's hard. It's really hard.
Okay, I like what you're saying, and I'm on board with it, right? And a lot of my friends, they say this as well. The thing is, though, like you're saying that off the back of all kinds of unusual experiences that are outside the thin slither of experience that the belly of Moloch sort of encourages you to be in. You've had experiences with psychedelic drugs that have been profound, eye-opening, mind-expanding, and you've probably had other moments, like becoming a father, all kinds of moments in your life. How old are you now?
I shall be 54 on Friday.
54, right. So you're, way past half your life, man.
Thank you. Thanks for the reminder.
Yeah, you're drawing on all that as you're going through your day. You've got this big repository of experiences,
right, yes,
feeding in. Not everyone has that.
Right.
I'll do that.
Well, why not?
Yes, damn it.
I mean, yeah. Maybe it was the time I was born in, when I grew up before. I remember a time before the internet, before email. Maybe there was just more time and space to do things. Or maybe I've just been very lucky and very privileged in that, I've been able to have those experiences and didn't immediately have to get some dead-end job. So I've been very lucky. But I would still, well, no, I don't know. I don't know. I would encourage people to make time to find those experiences of paying attention, of stepping outside the human world. I know it's hard, but there's such richnesses to be gained by doing it. But then you see, I didn't have an unusual upbringing like you. Yours sounds amazing. But I always felt slightly at odds with the world and not quite fitting in. And, it's an experience a lot of people, I would imagine, watching this would relate to. And there's something about that feeling slightly off key that means you're never quite sucked into the system. So, we're recording this a few days after the England women's football team have won the Euros, and it's great, and I'm really happy for them. But for some people, they act as though football is anything. It's a complete universe, and I'm like, it's just a game that humans have made up, as is the stock market, as is, getting likes on social media and all of that stuff. And I don't know why it's like I've never quite been able to buy into what's in fashion this year. People who follow fashion. It's like you're just following what someone else has told you to follow. I've never been part of that. And so perhaps it's always been easier for me to just look the other way. There's something about we're part of human culture. We need to participate in human culture, and it's important and it matters. So it does matter when people win a football game. It is important. At the same time, we need to look the other way and go, on the grand scheme of things, it's utterly irrelevant. It's irrelevant whether you publish your fantasy fiction, or I ever write another book, or record another album. On the grand scheme of things, it's completely irrelevant. We're just a blip in the great unfolding of the cosmos. And at the same time, it matters profoundly. And we can just sit with that tension of knowing, perhaps it means we hold things more lightly. It's something Satish would say, actually. It comes from Indian philosophy. We make our offerings to the world, but hold it lightly. It's my offering, and people will like it or they won't like it. But it's all I could do was make this offering, because on looking on that eye, it's irrelevant. On this eye, of course, it matters. Am I making any sense here? Am I rambling like an idiot?
I love this. This is why it's important to laugh at yourself.
Yes, laughter. Yes. How do we get this far without mentioning it? And take the piss out of yourself. To take the piss out of everything. So important.
I would like to see more of that. This stuff you're saying, right, about just making a bit of time for this. It's like critically important. People who value life and are trying to do something about ecological crisis. It might have an efficiency focus. It's all about carbon emissions. But you could say paying attention is just as important. So this is kind of efficiency, science engineering angle, and the arts and aesthetics trying to come together and do something, right? But with the people that do find a bit of spiritual connection or insight, or they have a numinous experience, I feel like there's this draw that they want to instantly put it on social media and sort of commodify it into like acclaim or attention or get some love or something that they're not getting. And it makes me think of, I wrote a little thing recently I call it like a blessing deficit disorder. And if you don't get those, if institutions in the culture actually treated you like with deep curiosity about who you were, there's never been an entity like Andy Letcher that existed before, and never will, ever, on any planet, anywhere, then that's a really important thing, and you want to encourage the Andy Letcherness of Andy Letcher and the meanness of me to become fully itself. If that's a kooky radical idea that institutions would do that, even educational ones. I think that's the role. That should be the job of education, especially. And I think that would be a culture in the world that I would love to live in if that happened. But since it doesn't, it feels like, okay, that's even more maybe a responsibility of the parents to just make sure you give a little bit of that blessing. You see your child, and you don't have to do anything. You just love them. They're enough. And we don't get that, and because maybe we're in a cycle of not getting that, because we're being churned up in the digestive system of Moloch. There's a blessing deficit disorder, and it makes parents become absent and pursue lofty goals or get into drugs and addiction and seek after something where they feel like blessed and good and they're here and they're alive and vibrant. There's a blessing deficit disorder and social media and the AI-backed power of social media that we can imagine as a demon is grasping that and commodifying it and pulling it out of people, and they'll have a beautiful experience straight on Instagram. And I'm tempted to do this sometimes, and I've really got to think, like, where do I draw the line with it? Does that spark anything for you?
Well, it does, and I'm familiar with that. We were talking about Stuart Lee earlier, I think, before we started filming, but he did a whole routine about it, about how placing meaningful experiences on social media just immediately nullifies them, it destroys them. And people are competing for what I would call spiritual capital, where they're trying to demonstrate just how spiritual or magical they are, but in doing so render the whole thing meaningless. That the power of a numinous experience, sure, you might want to share it at some point, but I think the power of it comes from not sharing. And we live in a culture where we have to share, we have to reveal ourselves at all time. How do you feel? How was it? What happened to you? What's the first thing you do when you do a wilderness retreat? You have a sharing circle and you're supposed to sort of tell people what happened. Well, that's not what happens in traditional cultures. The measure of whether anything happened is how you behave in your community. And they see whether you've changed or not by what you give to the community. It's not about you, it's about what you bring back. And it's so seductive, because who doesn't feel a stab of jealousy when someone posts something like that? Look at my magical experience in the Eildon Hills when I gave an offering of beans to Thomas the Rhymer, editing out the drone. And I'm like, fuck, I want to be that magical. I want people to think I'm that magical too. And so we all get drawn into this sort of catfight. We're all like, no, I'm more spiritual than you. No, I'm more spiritual than you. Or we, the worst offenders post this sort of clickbait questions like, so what are you going to do for the ecological crisis? Or, and everyone gets drawn in. And like you say, it's like a demon. And it's not that I'm immune to all of this. And of course, I've done it. And I have to constantly check myself. Do you need to be posting that? Is that just about me serving my ego, or is it just sharing something that I'm interested in? So we live in perilous times, and I really worry about our children, because they will grow up with social media, and there seems to be this cut-off between children who didn't grow up with smartphones and those who have, and it seems to be just damaging in every possible way, fragmenting attention, creating anxiety and uncertainty, and we've created a monster when I thought we were just going to have computers in our pockets that meant we could do cool things. But instead we've got this tool of absolute oppression, and we're all slaves to it, and I am. I've got a smartphone and I'm on social media, so I don't stand here as a saint. I'm mired in Moloch. I went up to London to see a play a couple of weeks ago, a play called Jerusalem, and Mark Rylance, and I missed it the first time round, and it's one of the few regrets I've had in life. So I finally went to see it, and it's just every bit as incredible as I had heard it was. And there were 2 intervals, and each interval leaves you in a moment of kind of, in a state of emotional turmoil. And the first thing the row of people in front of me did, literally the second the lights were on, phones out scrolling, and you can't even have a moment without whoosh, going back online. So somehow breaking that, I stopped listening to the news. Well, I've had periods where I don't engage with the news. I'm not currently in one, I'm following the news, but that's incredibly powerful because you're breaking this fundamental, this unwritten rule that to be a citizen, you follow the news. You're participating in world events. But what happens when you don't? Do I need to know this stuff? I don't need to know any of it. Don't need to know it. And there was a kind of radical subversive power in stepping away from the news at a time when everyone is supposed to be doom scrolling and, following the disasters. Now, I'm not suggesting we all do that, and I'm not suggesting that it's a kind of, state of naivety, but it's a way of disengaging with a machine. It's an industry, it's a news industry. You're being told particular stories for particular reasons. You're supposed to feel good about this, you're supposed to feel bad about this. There's a moral judgment about this. And what happens if you just step away from that? Again, it's just retreating from the world, retreating from this constant call on your attention to participate in anything but being here.
James Hillman, who we spoke about before, in his book Mythic Figures, has got this incredible essay on Hermes intoxication.
All right.
So obviously Hermes, was not obvious to me until a few years ago when I looked into this stuff. But Hermes is like, let's amplify Hermes for a second. So what I know, the little bit I know, is the messenger god of like thievery, and is the communicator between the gods, to do with language. The way that they mix together is interesting. Why you put thievery together with language and communication, and that if we're lived by powers we pretend to understand, like W.H. Auden said, and those powers could be imagined as gods and goddesses in whatever pantheon you like, then having mythic knowledge seems really important, because then you could be at least aware of what powers you're being lived by. And this essay that Hillman wrote on Hermes intoxication, it's like that power of Hermes, of information, like hyper communication, has got so intense by technologies now that it possesses. And you're saying step away, turn it off, and which is a really smart thing to do. And then what happens? You're still in touch with this beautiful, incredible god of language and thievery and other things, Hermes. You created a space for other kind of communication to happen, and maybe your own sustenance or soul or spirit is not being robbed by this Hermes intoxication moving through the internet, a kind of soul theft or something like this.
And technology is clearly part of our lives, and we're reliant on it here, and it does some very useful things. But I think the difficulty is we've been kind of subsumed into it's controlling what we do rather than the other way round. And I would just want to redress that balance, that we've created these very seductive devices and this constant need for likes and diving into social media and all of that. And the art surely is choosing it, choosing when to go in and when to come out. And I'm not sure people are choosing it anymore. I think it's choosing them. So it's kind of like being possessed or something.
Before we started talking on camera, we were talking about just the madness and difficulty of being a good parent, which means being around for your kids like properly, and also helping your other half, if you have one, to do their thing a little bit. So that massively reduces your capacity and time, and then you also have to like earn money, which also seems to take an awful lot of time. And if you're wildly fortunate, you can do a job that you love and does not destroy you. But I do hear David Simon, the creator of The Wire, saying in an interview, whoever you are, whatever you do, it will find some way to fuck you. And I feel like that's a little bit true. Even if you're the most, freelance, if you're still selling something, engaging with the economics, and if you're a small business or an artist, and you want to even get a little bit, half of what it takes to pay the bills even, you still have to use social media a lot. So it brings us back to the question of like, how do you keep your sovereignty and stay rooted and listen and bring in all that old story that's happening that we've been a little bit cut off from, or a lot cut off from, reclaim that connection, and at the same time operate and work with these technologies, at the same time as be a good parent, at the same time as earn money, at the same time as create a cultural renaissance. It's fucking impossible. But the impossibility of it, at least for me at the moment, because my children are younger than yours, or the oldest is 3.5, the ridiculous challenge of trying to do that has a little bit of energy for me. How can I do something? How can I not get devoured by social media and Moloch, and still do something like beautiful and good with my life? That's like, like you said, make a gift from my life, work as hard as fucking possible, and hold it lightly, and know that we're part of an ancient story that's going way beyond the lifetime of our planet and the lifetime of our species, probably. And so, deeply profound and important, and not really at all at the same time.
These are the challenges, and they're the challenges of our age. And like I said, humanity has not faced a situation like this ever before. And so, where are the maps? What do we do? We can look to the past, and we can look to what people have done before, but humanity's never faced a mass extinction before. It's never faced climate crisis. So these are uncharted waters, and we're all here trying to find the answer. We're all trying to find the way forward. We're all trying to balance the need to earn money and be part of the system, and tear down the system and create something new. We're in it, and we can't quite see out of it yet. All I can do is encourage everyone to find a way, because there are no answers. It's what I tell my students when they come here. We don't have the answer. If we had the answer, I'd be retired in an eco home somewhere. I don't have the answer, but you can find your answer to what you can do. And everyone's, like you said, everyone's a little drop, a golden drop of existence, with their own unique perspective on the world and their own history and autobiography, and they can each work out what to do, how to serve the world at this time of need.
It would be good to, you're saying, where's the map, where are the breadcrumbs, and we can't see our way out of it, but you know some that have been important for you. And if I had to name a couple, Ian McGilchrist's book, The Matter with Things, that's a golden breadcrumb. I would say the Consilience Project, what they're doing, that would be another one. And all the like the green witches and hedge wizards that are going outside and listening and doing that quiet magic and not putting it online, people don't know about them. Some practice like that, like you've been talking about, like that's what I'm doing anyway. I'm studying the Consilience Project, trying to read this massive, beautiful book, The Matter with Things, and do a little bit of... I feel like if I do that, then there's the scholarships coming in, and then the being and the feeling, the soul work. Maybe you need more of that, but we don't want to overwhelm. So maybe it'd be good to perhaps you could send us an email when you think of someone, you think of some now. I can put them in like the comment section. So, because people will be watching this go, yeah, I understand, I feel this as well. But what can we do? Where can we go? So, if you have any now, maybe you do, maybe you don't. You mentioned your teacher before, Graham
Harvey. He wrote a book called Animism.
Right.
Yes.
So he would be one.
Yes, that would be one. That's quite an academic tome. Well, Tyson Yunker Porter's Sand Talk, I always recommend. He's a Australian Aboriginal scholar who's musing about all these things, often in quite a hard-hitting and also very funny way. But equally, you know, it's a list of books. Maybe we need to put the books down. They're another technology, after all, right? Beautiful technology. I love books. Can't stop buying books. But it's a technology, so maybe put the books down, step outside, have a look, have a listen. You know, what's that bird singing over there? Do you know it? Well, how would you learn it? Where would you turn to learn it? Who could you turn to? I think that would be my advice, yeah. When I grew up, we had a TV show called Why Don't You Turn Off Your TV Set and Do Something Less Boring Instead? Why Don't You, for short. And the irony was that we all watched the show to learn to do things. But that's it. Why don't you turn off your TV set and do something less boring instead?
Good note to end on. People are watching this on a phone or a screen.
Yeah, turn it off now.
Turn the fucking thing off. That's what we're doing. Thanks a lot.
It's a pleasure.
That was good.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
If you liked this video and you want more of these to exist, then the best thing you can do is support me on Patreon. Even small pledges there help, because it's a boost to my spirits and it makes me want to do more. And also, every bit of financial support frees up time for creative projects such as these, making videos, conversations with inspiring people that are somehow involved in the work of re-ensouling the world, is how I see it. So that would be greatly appreciated, and thank you very much. I really appreciate it.